Man, I am tired of memorizing words. I really wish just for 10 minutes I could learn English in a different way that actually improves my English.
Well, lucky for you, I'm going to help you learn English with this amazing story about this very famous and huge pop band from Liverpool, England.
Okay.
So all you need to do, my friend, is just follow the message, find it interesting, hopefully, and you will naturally acquire at least 50 or so words and expressions, and you will naturally acquire English without having to memorize anything. Does that sound cool?
Cool.
Cool. Let's begin.
Okay.
So before we start, make sure you do access the PDF and worksheet that should be available to you, my friends. So make sure you have that before we start. All right, so let's begin. So back in the 1950s in Liverpool, England, a few young lads were destined for great things, but they just didn't know it yet. In 1956, a young and really scrawny teenager started up a band called the Quarrymen, blending all sorts like, jazz, folk, and blues. Busting his ass, playing gigs and venues, trying to hone his skills as a musician. Unbeknownst to Lennon, there was actually another teenager at one of the Quarrymen gigs in 1957. He watched intently, highly impressed with what he saw. His name was Paul McCartney. John and Paul met and they instantly, hit it off. They connected immediately as they were both musicians and they both shared the same musical tastes. They were into the same thing. John was actually taken aback by McCartney's ability to play and tune his own bass. John knew without a shadow of a doubt that McCartney was the perfect person to join his band, so he asked him immediately, and without hesitation, Paul said yes. How are you enjoying this so far? Is this cool?
Yeah, pretty cool actually.
Nice. Let's continue. After, finding their feet in this band together, Paul, with a bit of reservation, introduced his old school friend George Harrison to John Lennon in 1958 as a potential second guitarist. Super reluctant to George joining the band because of his age, he was only 14. He decided to let him in. John decided to let him in the end because of his immense talent on the guitar. As the year 1960 came around, they actually recruited two new members. One was Pete Best and the other was Stuart Sutcliffe. This was just before they embarked on the most transformational gigs of their lives in Hamburg, Germany. Hamburg, Germany was absolutely pivotal for shaping these young boys. They played in clubs like the Indra Club and the Kaiserkeller, playing some grueling sets for hours every night for hours on end. However, these early performances really helped level up their skills as musicians, and it really set the foundation for what was to come. The band, they moved around a ton. I mean, it went from the Quarrymen to Johnny and the Moondog to finally landing on the iconic name that we all know today, the Beatles. In 1961, after returning back to Liverpool, the Beatles became regulars at the Cavern Club, where they pulled in a growing fan base. A local record store owner named Brian Epstein found them out through, word of mouth and local gigs, being very insistent on becoming their band manager. With a bit of convincing, he got the job. Epstein cleaned up their image from, leather jackets to these tailored suits and helped adopt a more polished presence on stage. This turned out to be one hell of a good decision. Even with all this buzz going on in the band, things were far from roses. In 1962, Epstein actually secured this amazing audition for the band at Parlophone Records, but unfortunately, the producer of this recording studio, George Martin, was extremely underwhelmed with Pete Best's drumming performance. George saw so much potential in all of the other band members, but just felt that Pete wasn't up to par. After a lot of deliberation and back and forth, they ultimately decided to kick Pete out of the band and try to find a replacement for him. George Martin had been around the block and had a lot of experience with other drummers, so he had a lot of them at the back of his mind. However, there was one that really stood out to him and he knew could definitely fit the shoes of Pete. His name was Richard Starkey, aka Ringo Starr. This fine and highly skilled drummer was actually playing with another Liverpudlian band named Roy Storm and the Hurricanes, but with a bit of swaying, ultimately joined the Beatles, solidifying the famous lineup: Paul McCartney, John Lennon, George Harrison, and of course, Ringo Starr. The big breakthrough came in late '62 with the hit single Love Me Do, and then followed by Please Please Me in early '63. These songs marked the start of Beatlemania and their rise to global superstardom. What started as a group of teenagers just experimenting with music turned into the most influential band in history. But more on that in the next video. Make sure to like and comment on this video if you want to see what happens next. All right, how did you feel with that, man? Okay, so now we're gonna do some speaking practice, some just very quick shadowing. You're just gonna follow me. I'm gonna go a bit slower. I'm gonna, keep gaps or put gaps in the middle of each paragraph. You've now got the copy of this. I've just given it to you, so make sure you follow along with this now. And just follow me and try to speak as naturally and as close to my speech as possible. And that's it, it's that simple. We've got the input, the comprehensible input. Now it's your chance to really get that output practice in, which is just as important as the input, okay? But remember, most of the work is the input, but we still need to do a little bit of output practice as well, speaking. All right, here we go. So, back in the 1950s in Liverpool, England, a few young lads were destined for great things, but they didn't know it yet. In 1956, a young, scrawny teenager called John Lennon started a band named the Quarrymen, blending all sorts of genres like jazz, folk, and blues. They busted their ass gigging in local clubs and venues trying to hone their skills as musicians. Unbeknownst to Lennon, there was another teenager in the crowd at one of the Quarrymen gigs in 1957. He watched intently, highly impressed by what he saw. His name was Paul McCartney. John and Paul met and instantly hit it off, as they were both musicians and shared similar musical tastes. John was really taken aback by McCartney's ability to play and tune his bass guitar. John knew without a shadow of a doubt Paul would be the perfect person for his band, so asked him to join straight away. No hesitation. After finding their feet in this band together, Paul, although having some reservations, introduced his old school friend George Harrison to Lennon in 1958 as a potential second guitarist. Super reluctant due to George only being 14 at the time, John allowed Harrison to join the band simply because of his immense skill on guitar. As 1960 came around, the year 1960 came around, they recruited two new members, Stuart Sutcliffe and Pete Best. This was just before they embarked on the most transformational gigs of their lives in Hamburg, Germany. Hamburg was pivotal in shaping them. They performed at clubs like the Indra Club and Kaiser Keller, I think it's pronounced, playing some grueling sets for hours each night. However, these early performances helped level up their skills as musicians and set the foundation for what was to come, Good. The band name moved around a lot at that time, going from the Quarrymen to Johnny and the Moondogs, to finally landing on the iconic name we all know today, the Beatles. Yeah, excellent. Keep going. Well done. In 1961, after returning to Liverpool, the Beatles became regulars at the Cavern Club, where they pulled in a growing fan base. A local record store owner named Brian Epstein found them out through word of mouth and local gigs. Being very insistent on becoming their band manager, with a bit of convincing, got the job. Epstein cleaned up their image, persuading them to swap leather jackets for tailored suits and to adopt a more polished presence on stage. This turned out to be one hell of a good decision, or one hell of a smart move. either or. Even with all the buzz going on, things weren't all roses in the band. In 1962, Epstein secured them an audition at Parlophone Records, but the producer of this recording studio, George Martin, was extremely underwhelmed by Pete Best's drumming. George saw potential in all of the other band members, but felt that Pete was, not up to par. After a lot of deliberation and back and forth, they decided to kick him out and replace with someone else. George Martin had been around the block a few times and had a load of fantastic drummers at the back of his mind. He had one that really stood out and could definitely fill the shoes of Pete. His name was Richard Starkey, aka Ringo Starr. Good, keep going, almost there. This fine and highly skilled young drummer was currently playing with another Liverpudlian band called Roy Storm and the Hurricanes, but after a bit of swaying, joined the Beatles, solidifying the now famous lineup: John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. The big breakthrough for the band came in late '62, where they released the hit single, Love Me Do. You can hear it now. Then followed by Please, 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 Please Me in early '63. These songs marked the start of Beatlemania and their rise to global superstardom. Just think of Bieber hype. It's like the same thing, but with Beatlemania. What started as a group of teenagers experimenting with music turned into the most influential band in history. Well done. Awesome stuff. Oh, and one more thing. Don't stop now. Keep the momentum going. Keep training. Keep practicing. Best way to do that, go watch this video here. It's another awesome story with loads of speaking training. What are you waiting for? Go over there. I'll see you in a sec.